So we're going to be in Luke 19 as Jesus is weeping over the city of Jerusalem. And it says this: "And when he was come near, he beheld the city, and he wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come," notice the future tense there, "for the days shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. And they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation." Earlier this year, when Dr. Todd Baker and I went to the opposite side of the Mount of Olives. Now, on the opposite side of the Mount of Olives would be a biblical town called Bethany. Now, I've never been to Bethany before in all of my years traveling to Israel. I've never been to Bethany because I was told it's a very dangerous place. It's a large Arab population, and it's probably not a good idea to go there. But we decided to go there. And so we put the coordinates in our GPS, and we drove there. Now, you're looking at least not even a 10-minute drive, less than 10 minutes from Jerusalem to Bethany. We ended up driving to Bethany, found a parking spot, and we asked directions on how to get to the tomb of Lazarus. The Arabs there were so polite to us. The Arabs there were so kind to us. Totally going against the grain of everything that you hear from other individuals, by the way, who've never even been there. And so we ended up walking up this hill, and then I noticed an orange sign, and you can see this on my profile page. You go on my Facebook profile page, you can see the picture. We see an orange sign that said Tomb of Lazarus. So we went to the Tomb of Lazarus. We went down below. You had to walk down a flight of steps. We go down below to this 2,000-year-old tomb. And then we had to crawl on our hands and knees into the tomb itself. We were just blown away to actually be in a place that's mentioned in John chapter 11, in the Gospel of John. So we did a teaching there on video. As we made our way up, we were approached by a young Arab man who said, "Have you guys ever been to the area of Bethpage?" And we said, "No." So he took us not even a 5-minute walk to the area of Bethpage. And he says, "Well, I'm sure you guys as Bible teachers know what happened here 2,000 years ago." And I said, "Well, yeah, that is Bethpage, and we know exactly what happened there 2,000 years ago." And he said, "Well, it was from here that Jesus mounted on a donkey." But he referred to Jesus as Isa, which is Arabic for Jesus. Isa, I-S-A. And I said, "Well, sir, he's a Jew. And his original birth name would be Yeshua." He says, "You're right. You're absolutely right. But in Arabic, we call him Isa, but he says, you're right, Yeshua." He says it was right here from Bethpage that he gets on a donkey and he descends all the way down to the Mount of Olives, which is right over there, he says. I mean, no, Janice, there is no IDF presence in Bethany. None at all. There's no IDF presence in Bethlehem because they gave it over to the Palestinian Authority. There is no IDF presence in Jericho because they also gave that over to the Palestinian Authority, but we still visit these sites. And we've never had a problem at any of these sites despite the Arab population there. Never had an issue. Never had a problem at all. Anyway, back to the story. It was from Bethpage, Jesus mounts a donkey, begins his descent to the Mount of Olives. Well, here's a person I have not seen in a while. Becky DeCosta Broder is with us. I have not seen Rivka, that's Hebrew for Rebecca. I have not seen Rivka in years. And so, Rebecca, it's good to see you. Hope all is well with you and your family. And I hope that Patty and I can get together with you sometime and just see how things are going with you. It's been years. It's been years. So, good to have you with us, Becky. And so, we were right there in Bethpage. I mean, it's like you have Bethany here, and then just over the line, there's Bethpage. And I'm always used to seeing the Mount of Olives from the east side when I'm in Jerusalem, but I've never seen it from the opposite side when we were there in Bethany. Jesus takes that donkey ride from Bethpage down the slopes to the summit of the Mount of Olives. That's where we pick up the story right here in Luke 19:41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city, and he wept over it. Good to see my brother-in-law, Skip Marshall McGinnis, with us. Skip, good to see you, brother. Now, when Jesus descends from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, he beheld the city, Yerushalayim, Hebrew for Jerusalem. He beheld the city, and the Bible says he began to weep over it. Jesus laments over the city of Jerusalem. When I take my tour groups to the Mount of Olives, you will notice that there is a church on the Mount of Olives called the Dominus Flevit Church. It's shaped like a teardrop because they say it was within that area Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem. Jesus was a very emotional man. John 11:35, the shortest verse in the Bible. At Lazarus' tomb in Bethany, Jesus wept. He wept over the spiritual condition of Jerusalem. The spiritual condition of his flesh and blood, his brethren, the Jewish people. But the thing about Jesus is that you can't fool him. You know, Galatians 6:7 says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked." Jesus was not fooled by the ardor of the welcoming Jewish mob as they laid those palm branches on the ground, mounted him on that donkey, and said, "Hoshana Baruch haba b'shem Adonai." Hosanna, blessed is he who cometh in the name of the Lord. That same mob that cried Hosanna was the same mob that later on cried out, "Crucify him." Mark chapter 15, verse 13. So Jesus was not fooled by the welcoming mob there. He still wept because he knew what was going to happen down the road. His impending rejection. In verse number 42, this is what Jesus said, saying, "If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this the day, the things which belong unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thine eyes." In verse 42, Jesus is telling Israel, you have no idea what you are doing. You have no idea what's at stake here. And what's at stake? The kingdom that you so longed for, that you've prayed for over the centuries. It's within your grasp. It's at your fingertips. The kingdom is at hand. Remember Matthew 3. Preach and repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom is at hand. The peace that you so long for is at your fingertips. But because of what you're about to do, because of your attitude and your rejection of me, now the kingdom is going to be postponed. Do you guys realize what you're doing? Do you realize what is at stake? Think about this with me for a moment. If the Jews of Jesus' day would have acknowledged him as their prophesied Messiah, Jesus would have handed them the kingdom on a silver platter, and the Romans would have been wiped out in seconds. They would have been destroyed within seconds, and the kingdom would have been established right there in Israel with Jesus as their king. But because of their rejection, what did Jesus say? The last sentence of verse number 42, but now they are hid from thine eyes. The kingdom is not canceled. The kingdom is postponed for a future day. The Jews of Jerusalem have killed the messengers of God over the centuries and are now about to reject God's Son, God's greater revelation, Yeshua. And they will order his death at the hands of the Romans. Remember, again, inductive Bible study comes into play here. We compare scripture with scripture. Remember, Jesus is weeping over the city in Matthew 23:37. What does he say? O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen would gather her chickens under her wings, but ye would not. Then he directs his attention to the temple across the Kidron Valley, the valley of Jehoshaphat in Joel 3, on the Temple Mount to the west of the Mount of Olives. He looks at the temple and he says, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Jesus says one day that temple that you Jews love so much is coming down brick by brick, buddy. Every single stone is going to be thrown down. And 40 years later, that's exactly what happened. Because of this rejection of Jesus by Israel, two things will happen. Number one, the postponement of the kingdom. And number two, the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans, which happened in 70 AD. Jesus brings that up in verse number 43. For the day shall come, that's future tense, for the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee or surround thee round, and keep thee or close thee in on every side. Jesus says the enemies of Israel will come in, and they're going to level this city. And 40 years after Jesus prophesied that destruction, it was fulfilled in 70 AD. Again, he says, for the days shall come, future tense, that Israel's enemies, that would be the Romans, will cast a trench round about thee. Whenever the Romans attack a city, they always first built a trench to make sure that nobody would escape. Let me take you to Masada. Come to Israel with us next year. I'll take you to Masada, near the Dead Sea, where you can still see the remains of Roman camps that surrounded the mountain. And you can still see, perfectly preserved, 2,000 years later, a trench around that mountain of Masada, where the Jews held out against the Romans for about 3 years until the Romans finally built a ramp on the eastern side of Masada that is still perfectly preserved today. You can still walk up that Roman ramp because they couldn't use their catapults and cannonballs because the Jewish zealots were so high up until they built that ramp. And the moment they got to the wall of Masada, they took a battering ram, according to Josephus, and breached that wall. But you can still see the remains of that trench round about Masada. Jesus says that they shall build a trench about thee. That's exactly what the Romans did. They cast a trench about Jerusalem. They built an embankment. They surrounded the city. They enclosed the city, just as Jesus prophesied in Luke 19:43. They leveled Jerusalem and destroyed the second temple. The Romans will level the city to the ground. They will destroy the temple. They will scatter the Jews to the four corners of the earth as prophesied in Deuteronomy 28, verses 64 through 66. They will decimate the second temple, in which not one stone of the temple will be found. Notice what Jesus said in verse 44. And they shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. And they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Folks, why is it today you cannot find one single trace of a stone from the temple? You can ask any Israeli archaeologist, even Gabriel Barkai, who is the chief archaeologist of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. You can ask him that very question. You know, Dr. Gabai, have you found one trace of the temple? You know what he's going to tell you? Nope, not one. Why? Jesus said, they will not leave thee one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's a prophecy, folks, from Yeshua himself. Not one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. You know, Becky DaCosta said, we'd love to see you both. Love the teaching. It's definitely been years, and it's good to hear you teach again. Well, Becky, it's so good to see you again. We need to definitely get together. And man, it's so good to see you here. Also want to welcome Isaac Staples into the room. Isaac, thank you so much for tuning in with us. So ask any archaeologist in Jerusalem, why can't you find a stone in the temple? Well, you know what they'll tell you? We don't know, but we can't find not one stone. I know Jesus said, there will not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, folks, Jesus gives a clear reason for this judgment that would happen 40 years after he prophesied it. Because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. The Jews of the first century missed the opportunity for the establishment of the kingdom because they were ignorant of the messianic passages of Messiah's first coming. They rejected him. And because of that rejection, Jesus said in verse 42, but now they are hid from thine eyes. The kingdom that you so longed for was right at your fingertips, in your grasp. Now, it's postponed. And the Romans will still occupy this place. You will still have woe and misery, but you're not going to have the kingdom right now. The kingdom will be postponed for a future date. Jesus sketches a brutal siege and conquest. And there can be no doubt that the Roman assault of Jerusalem in 70 AD is clearly in view here. That the city would be laid to the ground. That word laid to the ground, the verb used combines the idea of the destruction of a city. As we read about in Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 26, where it says, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. That's it, folks. That's exactly what Jesus said. They will level thee even to the ground. Will level the city of Jerusalem to the ground. This destruction would also involve the Romans dashing infants against the walls and rocks as described in Psalm 137 in verse number 9, where it says, happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. The Romans did that when they killed every male Jewish boy from 2 years old and under on orders of Herod the Great. They had no problem. They took joy in taking these babies, these infants, and these little children, grabbing them by their ankles and swinging them like baseball bats against the rocks, against the ground. Great to see Patsy Holt with us in the room today. Patsy, thank you so much for joining us. The Romans took pleasure in doing, folks, what they did. Man, those guys were a brutal war machine. signified by the legs of iron in Daniel's vision. Actually, in the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had in Daniel chapter number 2. Before the 70 AD Roman assault on Jerusalem, we must back up at least 5 years earlier, to the year 66 AD. This would be the beginning of the Jewish revolt against Rome in 66 AD that was called the Great Revolt, or as they say in Hebrew, Ha-Mered Ha-Gadol, the Great Revolt. The Great Jewish Revolt against Rome that happened in 66 AD. Now, this revolt was instigated by a Jewish sect called the Sicarii. They were known as the men of the great dagger. They were Jewish assassins, or you better know them as the Zealots, or in Hebrew, Kanaim. Zealots, Kanaim. They were Jewish assassins who not only opposed Roman occupation and carried out attacks against Roman soldiers, but they would kill any Jew suspected of collaboration with the Roman soldiers. They were known as the men of the great dagger. Speaking of daggers, I have among my biblical antiquities collection a 2,000-year-old dagger. And this is like one of my prized babies right here. I got this in Jerusalem. And this is sort of what the Romans would have used back then, but also those Sicarii, the men of the great dagger. If this thing could talk the stories it would tell. This is a 2,000-year-old Roman dagger. And this is something that those Sicarii, those zealots would have carried. And if they found out you collaborated with the Roman authorities, they would have snuck up on you when you least expect it. And they would have plunged this right into you. Those guys were, folks, they were no joke. They were no joke at all. But they were the ones that instigated this revolt. They were assassins. They opposed the Roman occupation, and they would kill any fellow Jew that was suspected of collaborating with the Roman authorities. The 66 AD revolt gave birth to other Jewish revolts against Rome. The Jewish revolt at Jotapata in the Galilee. That was led by Josephus, who was the commander of the Jewish forces in the Galilee. It's been a while since I've been to Jotapata. I'd love to go to Jotapata again while we're there, do a video teaching while we're there. But it was at Jotapata that Josephus was captured by the Roman authorities. Knowing that the Romans were about to come upon Josephus and his men, Josephus said, listen, guys, why should we be captured by the Romans? Why don't we just all commit suicide? Let's die as free Jews. Hey, great idea, Josephus. So they cast lots. They start killing one another. And then all of a sudden, two men were left standing. Josephus and another Jewish man. Josephus said, wait a minute, what was I thinking? I must have been tripping. Okay? Why don't we just surrender, fall upon the mercy of the Romans? And that didn't sit well with the other Jewish man who tried to kill Josephus. After it was Josephus that said, well, listen, you're the one that suggested we all die. Now you want to surrender to the Romans after everyone has committed suicide? Josephus and the other Jewish man was captured. The other Jewish man was killed. I'm telling you the story by how Josephus records it. And I have a copy of Josephus called The Jewish Wars. Josephus is captured by Vespasian, who was then the commander of the Roman forces. Josephus looks at Vespasian and says, God told me to tell you that one day you will become emperor of Rome. Whoa! Man, Vespasian loved that. But guess what, folks? A few years later, Vespasian becomes the emperor of Rome. Now, either that was a coincidence or whatever the case is, I don't think Josephus was some sort of a Jewish prophet of anything. I just think he just said that to appease Vespasian, but it did happen. Vespasian was so infatuated with Josephus that he took Josephus under his wing, brought Josephus to Rome, and gave him the name Flavius. That's why he's known as Flavius Josephus, or Josephus Flavius. But Josephus was known as a traitor among his own people. Vespasian asked Josephus to go to Jerusalem with a Roman army to persuade the Jews to stop rebelling against Rome. They would not listen. As a matter of fact, today when you talk to any Jew in Israel, they'll say, Josephus, that traitor. Oh, we love his writings. Boy, he gives us a lot of information, but we hate him. He betrayed our people. So you had the Jewish revolt at Jotapata, where Josephus was originally captured by the Romans in the Galilee. Then you had the revolt at Gamla in the Golan Heights. I always take my tour groups to Gamla and I show you where that revolt happened between 66 and 70 AD. Remember I showed you a picture of Gamla yesterday? It's a mountain that looks like a camel's hump. That's why they call it Gamla. Gamel, which is Hebrew for camel. Gamel. Gamla. Because it looks like a camel's hump. And then, of course, the revolt at Masada in 73 AD. And then the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD, which was the final Jewish revolt against Rome. Hadrian was the emperor of Rome at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. There was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, listen, Bar Kokhba must be the Messiah. He's leading a Jewish revolt against Rome. So I dubbed Bar Kokhba the Messiah. Well, obviously he wasn't the Messiah, because not only did Bar Kokhba and thousands of Jews die in that revolt, Rabbi Akiva was killed by the Romans as well. But the Roman Emperor Hadrian crushed the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD. He ran the shores of the Sea of Galilee red in the blood of the Jewish resistant fighters. And then Hadrian banned Jews from entering Jerusalem, renaming Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina in honor of an ancient pagan Roman god. And he renamed the land of Israel Palestine. Now you know where the name came from. Palestine, in honor of Israel's ancient enemies, the Philistines. So Hadrian wanted to add injury to insult. I know today you have a group of Arabs who call themselves Palestinians. No such people, no such place, no archaeology to show that any people existed in the land prior to the Jewish people. Now, according to the rabbis, the Jewish catastrophe that led to both temples being destroyed was on Tisha B'Av, which corresponds to the month of August. The rabbis say that it was on Tisha B'Av, 586 BC. The first temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians. And it was on Tisha B'Av, August 9th, 70 AD, that the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, Herod's temple. The rabbis say the Jews experienced so much catastrophe on Tisha B'Av over the centuries. According to the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, the Jewish rebellion against Rome began in 66 AD in Caesarea. I take my tour groups to Caesarea all the time. You can still see the remains of a Roman amphitheater there. You can still see the remains of a, the name is escaping me right now, but where they had horse races like you saw in Ben-Hur. The name would come to me in a few minutes. I hope it does anyway. But you can still see the remains of chariot races. I mean, it's amazing and you can still see the remains of what they believe was Paul's prison at Rome when he stood before Felix and before Festus and Herod Agrippa and so on and so forth. But the rebellion was born in Caesarea in 66 AD. And the reason why is because you had Greeks who were there at that time. They were sacrificing birds in a pagan manner in front of Jewish synagogues. That didn't sit well with the rabbis back in the day. That did not sit well with the Jews back in the day. They complained to the Romans. The Romans failed to intervene. So now you have tensions between the Jews and the Greeks that were in Caesarea at that time. But what added fuel to the fire was heavy Roman taxation against the Jews at Caesarea, among other grievances, which led to Jewish attacks upon Roman citizens and upon Roman troops. According again to Josephus Flavius, the Jewish temple clerk Eleazar ben Hananiah said, I'm going to stop praying for the Roman emperor in the temple. I'm going to stop sacrificing to the God of Israel on his behalf because of the way they're treating our people. And then, folks, the Jewish revolt in 66 AD commenced. It carried on for 5 years. And then 5 years later, 70 AD, Rome crushed the rebellion, destroyed the temple. They took the temple treasures back to Rome as depicted on the Arch of Titus in Rome. I saw the Arch of Titus when I was in Rome last May for the very first time. It's a 2,000-year-old relief which shows Jewish slaves carrying the temple treasures from Jerusalem back to Rome. What's visible is the 7-branched menorah as depicted in Exodus 25. The silver trumpets as depicted in Numbers chapter 10 and verse number 1. All of that being brought back to Rome. When we were there, the lady who was talking to the group of people that were there, we were there, not a part of that group, but we were there listening to her. And she says, you can see right here the Arch of Titus relief. As you can see, Roman soldiers carrying the temple booty back here to Rome. So I said, ma'am, I don't mean to correct you. You're the expert here. I said, but those are not Roman soldiers. Those are Jewish slaves. She says, well, how do you know that, sir? I said, as depicted by the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius 2,000 years ago, the Roman soldiers used Jewish slaves to carry the temple treasures back to Rome. By the way, what you're looking at right there, ma'am, was a prophecy by Jesus in Matthew 24 and Luke 19:41 through 44. She looked at me like I had 3 heads, and then she just continued to lecture. Not lecturing me, but lecturing about the history of that place. Today in Israel, especially in Jerusalem, you can still see today tangible evidence of Jesus' prophecy in Matthew 24 and Luke 19 of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. I'll take you into the into the southwestern corner of the temple complex area. And you can see the remains of a 2,000-year-old road. No doubt Jesus and his disciples walked down that very street. You can see the remains of Jewish shops 2,000 years ago. And right in the middle of that street is a large, massive pile of stones that were thrown over the walls by the Roman troops. They came down with such tremendous force, they caved the road beneath. You can still see that road caved in today with those massive piles of stones. I touched those stones. I sat on the very top of those massive stones. Folks, I'm touching tangible evidence. A tangible prophecy that came into fulfillment of what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and Luke 19. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem. It's amazing. But you want to know something? In the future, a man of Roman descent will come and bring destruction upon the Jewish people, upon the city of Jerusalem, and upon a third Jewish temple. He will be far worse than his ancient predecessors, and he will seek total annihilation of the Jewish people. He is described in Daniel chapter 9 and verse number 26, where that reads, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined." In other words, after the 69 weeks of prophecy, the Messiah, the only time we find the word Messiah, Mashiach, shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince. After the 69 weeks of prophecy, the Messiah is cut off. He is crucified. He's put to death. This happens after the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem by Nehemiah in 445 BC, Daniel 9:25, and prior to Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD. Messiah had to be cut off between those two events. The people of the prince. The people, obviously, would be the Romans who destroyed the city and the sanctuary. That was in 70 AD. The people of the prince. Well, who was the prince? This future prince would be the Antichrist. He comes from the people who destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. He's of Roman descent. Come on. He's not Islamic. He is not Arab, as some of these Christians that I'll teach now, which is absolute nonsense. He is a man of Roman descent. He is a Roman. This same man of Roman descent will confirm the covenant with many, the Jews, for 1 week. That 1 week is a future 7-year period of tribulation. That's Daniel 9:27. But at the midway point, he will break that covenant with the Jews at the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week of prophecy. And he will go on a global persecution and will seek to annihilate. He will seek to kill the Jewish people. And folks, he'll do exactly that. Because according to Zechariah chapter 13 and verse number 8, 2/3 of the Jewish people will perish at the hand of this future Roman ruler who comes out of the revived Roman Empire. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, Revelation 12, Revelation 13, Revelation 17. He will come out of a 10-nation, 10-toed revived Roman Empire. Daniel chapter 7, verses 7, 8, 20, 24. Revelation 12:3, Revelation 13:1, Revelation 17, 3, 7, 12, 16. A final 10-toed, 10-nation revived Roman Empire. And by the way, many Gentiles will die at his hands as well. Revelation 6:8, 1/4 of the world's population is put to death through the opening of the seal judgments. Revelation 9:18, another 1/3 of humanity dies with the opening of the trumpet judgments. It's going to be a mess at that time, folks. Jesus the Messiah will return at his second coming, and he will destroy the beast and the false prophet and cast them into a lake of fire. That's Revelation 19 verses 19 and 20. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, in which they had deceived the world, they had received the mark of the beast, and them that worship this image. These both, beast and false prophet, these both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. Satan will be bound in a bottomless pit for the duration of the millennial kingdom reign of Messiah Yeshua. He will be bound in that bottomless pit, folks, for 1,000 years. At the end of the 1,000 years, Satan will be loose. Why? Because God said so. He will try to overthrow the kingdom of Jesus one final time. Fire will come down from heaven to destroy him and his followers. And then Satan will be cast into the lake of fire. That's Revelation chapter 20 verse 10. and the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. He will join his henchmen, the Antichrist and the false prophet, when they're cast into the lake of fire. Folks, as I close, the great Jewish revolt against Rome between 66 and 70 AD reminds us that a future Roman ruler will seek to finish what his predecessors began 2,000 years ago. And so that great Jewish revolt against Rome reminds us that one day, folks, Bible prophecy will be fulfilled. Jesus is coming soon. The trumpet could sound today. The rapture of the church could possibly happen today. So you and I, as followers of Yeshua, must keep looking up, knowing that our redemption is drawing so very near. So as I bring this broadcast to a close, don't forget to visit my website, todayinbibleprophecy.org. Again, sign up for the newsletters. Check out our bookstore. You can help support this ministry by going to the PayPal button at the bottom of the page. And you can give your support through that or mail your support to Today in Bible Prophecy Ministries, 55 Pleasant Street, Apartment 2, Lincoln, Rhode Island, 02865. You can also order a copy of this message on CD by, again, going to the PayPal button at the bottom of our website and just put Jewish Revolt CD. That's all you need to put in there, Jewish Revolt CD. Fill that out, send it to us. When we get it, we'll make sure that we get a CD out to you. Listen to it in your car or wherever you may be. And again, we upload these audio of these messages on YouTube, so you can listen to it on YouTube. And look at all of my videos on YouTube of me teaching prophecy in Israel, Rome, Petra in southern Jordan. All major areas that will play a major role in end-time Bible prophecy in the not-too-distant future. So check me out on YouTube. Look at all of my breaking news stories that I upload to Twitter. My handle is August Rosado at Bible_prophecy on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. And of course, here on Facebook, my page is public. These videos are public, so anybody can check it out. They don't have to be a Facebook friend of mine. So folks, remember, keep looking up. Jesus is coming soon. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I hope to see you, Lord willing, tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So guys, have a wonderful Wednesday. And we look forward to seeing you soon. God bless you all, and talk to you later.